Okay, we should be live on Facebook. Welcome to the July 13 edition of the Center for Rural Affairs Rural Rapport. So I want to thank everyone for taking time out of your lunch to join us. I'm the Development Director, Nick Bergin. Today I'm going to be joined by the Center's Executive Director, Brian Depew, and we're going to be talking about community development lending, which is one of the Center for Rural Affairs core things that we do here in Nebraska. So I guess just my first question for Brian, when most people think about lending, they think about banks and debt, and the Center for Rural Affairs isn't a bank, we're a nonprofit. So why did the Center for Rural Affairs get involved in lending money to small businesses?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I think you're right, and I think there's a lot of history, and there's two things that come to mind there. You can track back decades, really, and one is the international microfinance movement that really goes back 40 years, and folks may have heard of the Grameen Bank, founded by Muhammad Yunus in Bangladesh, I think in the early 1980s. And there's a really great book called Banker to the Poor, written by Yunus, about his experience founding the Grameen Bank. It's a really accessible read and a really inspiring read for anybody that's interested in community development finance. But what Yunus showed internationally originally is that you could lend responsibly to the poor, to the unbanked, oftentimes, or I think exclusively with no collateral in Yunus's case and in the Grameen Bank's case, and they would pay back. They would pay the loans back. He started with very small loans and showed that they, folks had the capacity and the interest and the desire to pay them back, and they recognized that the bank was acting in their interest and they wanted to be part of that. And the Grameen Bank inspired an international movement around microfinance and was replicated in many countries. The concept has been replicated, including in the US. And so in the US, you kind of had a similar trend that has ultimately become what is known now as community development financial institutions. And the center is a community development financial institution. And that is a network of nonprofit lenders all over the country. But the other route of how the center got interested in lending is that in the early 1990s, following the farm crisis, the center was doing research in the Great Plains on trends in employment and found that there was a growing prevalence of employment in non-farm small businesses coming out of the farm crisis. And we realized that communities in this part of the country needed to diversify their economies because there was less employment opportunities in small farm agriculture. And so entrepreneurship became one of those ways for folks to make a living and own a business in a small community in the Great Plains. And the center started doing small business support and then lending as a strategy to support those folks. And our work started in the 90s.
And I've read several articles about Muhammad Yunus, but I haven't read his book yet. That is on my list. So you recommend it?
Yeah, I read it over Christmas break last year, actually. I had meant to read it for a long time, and I was in a used bookstore and I saw a copy of it and I picked it up. And, I knew it was a book I should read, but for some reason I had in my head that it wouldn't be like an easy or fun read, being nonfiction. But it actually is. It's a really accessible read. It's really fun to read, and it's super inspiring, his story and what they accomplished. I really recommend it.
So if we're lending to people that banks don't generally want to lend to, that's what the Center for Rural Affairs does. So, isn't there a greater risk to the organization? If banks aren't doing it, why would we want to do it?
Yeah. I think there's two questions there. I'll take that in the why, and then I'll take it in the risk. Uh, Muhammad Yunus says in his book that access to capital is a human right. And I think that's the why. And that seems right to me. We don't often think about that when we're thinking about human rights, but most of all of us use access to finance, whether it's to buy a house or to buy a car or to start a business, or we rely on access to finance for things in our community, healthcare facilities, childcare facilities, all of these things that undergird a good life, that undergird human rights, rely on access to capital. And unfortunately, we've seen a retrenchment of traditional finance from communities we serve, whether it be a retrenchment from rural communities or just from serving low-income individuals or new immigrants. And so I have become absolutely convinced that if we want to control the destiny of our communities, we have to control at least some of the capital investment. So for me, that's the why. And then on the risk, the CDFI industry as a whole has showed that you can lend to people that banks won't traditionally lend to and be really successful with repayment and risk management. I think the industry as a whole, the community development financial institution industry in the US as a whole, has something like a 97 or 98% repayment rate. And it's because nonprofit lenders, they tend to offer wraparound services as well, small business technical assistance, home ownership classes, to help folks in addition to just, we don't just give people a loan, but we're providing training and coaching and staying hands-on with them, and we're really invested in their success. And also we do really careful underwriting, and we're careful to make sure that we don't lend people more than they can afford to pay back. And when you make the right size loans and you provide wraparound services, people want to repay, and they do. I think there's another way of asking the risk question too, which is, like, what is the risk of not lending in these communities and to a broad swath of the population? And that risk is disinvestment. It's disinvestment in our communities. It's a decline in home ownership. It's a decline in business starts. And if banks aren't going to be doing that lending or lending deep enough into the communities that we care about, somebody has to do it, or we risk a real disinvestment. And I think, for non-mission driven lenders, we care holistically about the communities, and we're driven to try to fill those gaps that exist in the traditional finance world.
Yeah, and I think when a lot of times when people think of economic development, they think about attracting big businesses, Microsoft or Google, or these are the big ones we read about in the newspapers. Why aren't, as an economic development organization, why aren't we going after those? Why do we care about these small guys?
Well, for starters, big businesses have access to traditional finance. They don't need our help. And I'll acknowledge large businesses are an important part of the employment ecosystem even in a lot of mid-sized communities, but especially for small communities like Lyons, Nebraska, where the center's home office is, population like 850 people. It's just not a strategy that works for these communities. There's not, we're not going to have an employer with 1,000 jobs or even hundreds of jobs move to town. But what we have seen in our community and in thousands of other communities like Lyons is individuals that have started businesses, and either they're supporting themselves through self-employment in their business, or they've grown a bit and maybe they have 3 employees or 5 employees, or we have a manufacturer in Lyons, I think, that has 50 or 60 employees. That's a major employer in a small rural community. And that's who we're focused on. And so often those are homegrown entrepreneurs. They're not somebody from outside of the community that comes in and brings their business to the community. So I think that's it's just what works, right? What works for small communities. In addition, microfinance and small business lending, it provides an opportunity for everyday rural people to participate in the economy, to participate in solving a problem or filling a need in their community, and to build assets through ownership. So large businesses are part of the ecosystem for employment, but by and large, you work for a large business, you don't have the opportunity to build assets through ownership. And when you're self-employed, work in a small business, you have that opportunity to build assets through ownership. Sometimes it's as simple as like owning the building that your business is located in. But that just like being a homeowner helps you build assets over time, owning your business building is another asset that you can build over time to increase wealth among everyday working rural people.
So, and also one of the things I think of is with small businesses, often more of those dollars stay local and get recycled in the local economy.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the data all shows that. And not only do you get the booster effect of the dollars staying locally, but also just you're more in control of your destiny of your community rather than being, at the mercy of some large employer that we've seen time and time again. Large employers, when it's in their interest, they'll pull out of the community, they'll close the store. And that results in a decrease in employment in the community. But it also can result in a decrease in access to services in the community. We've been spending a lot of time talking about business lending in our conversation here, but the center has also recently started to expand our community finance work into housing lending. And a lot of nonprofit lenders in the country are focused on areas outside of just business lending, whether it be housing lending or community facilities. And there's a lot of ways in which access to credit is important to live in a good life and a good community. And we've really seen and diagnosed that a lot of small communities in our region have challenges with access to affordable housing. And so we've been trying to develop new lending products within the single family mortgage space and exploring multifamily housing and figuring out how community-based financing can help be part of that solution.
Right, because when you have workers, your workers have to have a place to live. And I mean, we all know, everyone who lives in a small community, there are old houses that are dilapidated. It takes money to fix those up. It takes financing.
Yep. And that's a real gap that we see in traditional financing is the sort of both owner-occupied rehab as well as purchase rehab resale. And so one of our recently rolled out loan products allows for rehab and repair loans, specifically to both address that issue of dilapidated housing in communities, but also try to leverage that to get those, because oftentimes fixing up dilapidated houses done right can actually produce affordable housing stock in a way that is oftentimes difficult with new construction.
Well, thank you, Brian, very much. I think we're about on our 15-minute mark. So I want to thank you very much for sharing with us today, Brian. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your afternoon and a great lunch hour.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. Take care, all.